thanks everybody for joining us today. We are very excited about, our new release of global modeling. I think it's been out there for a couple of weeks, and today's the first day we're really going to kind of really just demonstrate what it does. So I'm going to do a few slides to get underway to kind of get things kind of set the stage, and then we'll get into the actual demonstration. So hi everybody, my name is Keith Belanger, and I am the product evangelist here at SQL DBM. Prior to coming to SQL DBM, I was about 28 years in the on the data management or in the data space. I started as a data modeler in the mid 90s, doing OLTP and Kimball. And over the years, I've had BI administrator, data architect, director of data, did ETL development, did a lot of varieties. I've done implementations in Data Vault, dimensional modeling, and currently Snowflake data superhero. So pretty wide array of experiences. And the topic for today is something I felt, and maybe many of you are also feeling, that as we were progressed, a lot of change in the industry. And that's kind of what I want to first start out with, and understanding like how we got to where we are today from a data modeling perspective. So before we start, like what is global modeling? And I've had a few people ask me, so let's talk about what global modeling is and what it is not. So global modeling is essentially, from our perspective, a framework, a set of capabilities that we're bringing to the data modeling solution and data modeling practice to kind of empower and support organizations that are going to, maybe you're adopting data mesh, or you've gone already towards data products and decentralization and not fully doing data mesh, and you're kind of just going from that single model to really that going across the enterprise to multiple different domains. What it is not. So global modeling isn't another style of modeling, right? It's not to replace dimensional modeling. It's not to replace Data Vault. It's not to replace 3NF. Those are all still what people are going to use and are probably using as they're doing their projects. But what we're really trying to do is solve, how do you do that across multiple domains, multiple products, so in an enterprise, and see that. And that really is what we're talking about as global modeling, is being able to do Data Vault across domains, or dimensional modeling across domains. And that's kind of what we're going to kind of walk through today. So let's kind of talk about the different aspects of global model. We kind of identify them as 4 pillars. Today we're going to be talking about pillar number 1, global reference. Over the following this year, we're going to introduce these following other pillars, but we wanted to start getting the solution into people's hands early on, and we'll start introducing more and more. Global reference is what we're going to be talking about today. That is going to be the ability to reference objects across projects or across domains, and how you can do that in your models. Eventually, we're going to be introducing what we call global search. This is now going to give you the ability to search across all of your models. So as organizations, and I've had conversations with some companies that could have up to 100 different models. Well, if you're trying to find a specific table or something that might be in another project, global search will allow you to search across. Like, where's the DIM customer? Where's that customer dimension? Oh, search for it. So as you start looking across your enterprise, being able to find those objects. Global standards. So as organizations, you might, even if you're looking at data mesh principles, you have that autonomy and give people a level of freedom, but at the same time, you want to have some level of standards across the organization so that you can put the puzzle pieces back together. So with SQL DBM's global standards, you'll be able to sit there and say, hey, here are our naming conventions at a higher level that can propagate across all of your models. Or maybe you want to use templates or a glossary and stuff like that. So that's going to be introduced as what we're calling global standard. And then one of the other ones, which I think is going to be another big hit, is what we're calling global lineage. So what this is going to be able to do is to start defining your source to target, say, mappings in your development process. Not like, hey, now I've already built my my ETL or my ELT stuff, and now I want to see what that lineage is. When you're designing, when you're doing your modeling, and you want to start, representing that lineage at the design time, maybe because you want to hand that as a specification or to your data engineering team. So global lineage will be the fourth part of global modeling that will be coming here in the weeks to months to come. So now I'm going to go to, let's talk about the evolution of, data modeling. When I started data modeling, probably in the mid 90s or so, it was one person had that data modeling license, and you had all of these different areas within your organizations all coming to this one person. Maybe you had a couple people. And then you were maintaining this large monolithic model, right? Maybe your warehouse was just back then, it was all going into, one database. But what's happened over the years is this kind of change where organizations started saying, hey, we can't, this is too slow for us. This is too much of a bottleneck. So next thing you know, you had different domains in different areas in the organization, each working on their own needs for the business. Now we call them like data products, but they could have been, marts or anything else. But you're trying to handle a variety of different deliverables for your business. On top of that, and I'm kind of representing it here, people started going agile. Maybe you needed the ability for multiple squads, multiple people to be working at the same time. So you had, again, this decentralized like focus, you had agile teams. But here you can say in this scenario, you would have siloed models, right? Each of these different domains and areas don't know what each other is doing. So here you kind of have that autonomy that's important. You have the ability to have, from an agile perspective, multiple people working. We call it concurrent working in our product. But at the same time, and each of these could even be going to different data platforms. One could be saying, we're using Snowflake, another one's using Databricks. Maybe somebody's using a federation tool to go across it. But there's a lot of technical scenarios. But in this case, how do you understand and model across that? So what we're now introducing is, again, what we're calling global modeling. Global modeling is to take this kind of decentralized model and now starting to put it together. And what we're calling global modeling is that you have that same that autonomy, but now the interoperability and that a way to put, I like to say, Humpty Dumpty back together again. So that's kind of where I've given you a visual perspective how we see data modeling. So each of these different domains could have, again, different technology data platforms. They could all be doing agile and having multiple squads and having multiple modelers or engineers who need to be working on the model, but at the same time having to leverage data products or data structures that are owned by other domains within the organization. So now I want to just kind of set the stage before we kind of go into the actual demo and what I'm actually going to demonstrate. So going a little bit, lower in the conversation in terms of what we said. Here's a very basic scenario. We might have a sales organization that has they're going to have a sales fact table. They want to understand what's going on, and they have these dimensions: customer, date, product. But then you also look at supply chain perspective. Well, they're also interested in the date dimension, and they're also interested in product, and for their specific type of data product for doing some demand forecasting. The interesting thing here is now you're starting to see the possibility of, two date dimensions being created, two product dimensions being created, but who owns what, right? And some of you might have heard the concept of what we call bounded context. You might, and you start getting into the governance perspectives, and you say, well, you know what? There's a central team, and every organization is being different. What I'm about to say here isn't like this is how it should be done. It's just more for an example for the sake of this demonstration. But an organization might say we're going to have a common domain, some things that's central for things that are not belonging to any specific domain, but so like the date dimension or geography or even employees or other things like that. But we might sit there and say, you know what, the supply chain team owns product and sales just references product, but they don't own product, but sales owns customer and the sales. So you start building out that and defining like who is the data owner, who is the domain that's going to own that. And so you sit there and say, well, how can we now model across this and understand? So this kind of takes us to where we want to go with global modeling, which is to sit here and say, we can configure and set up these separate projects and domains. So for example, here I created a common one. And then we have our supply chain and we have sales. And we can see here, if we're looking at the sales domain, is that they need that dimension from the common team, which is that date dimension. And then the supply chain who has that product, sales is referencing that as well. But you can also see here in that the supply chain team needs that date dimension. So as you can see here, now what we're really creating is, well, we don't need duplicate product tables. We don't need duplicate date dimensions. And now we can sit here and say, who owns that data? Who's the bounded context? Who owns that? And then reference it across. But then people might say, well, Keith, what if, something changes? When you're establishing this, you start creating what's called like a contract, right? So you're going to have a contract now between sales and supply chain, sales in the common space. And what's happening is, well, let's just say supply chain makes a change to the product. They add a new column to that. So when that happens, in our scenario, you would get notified that a change has occurred, and that so if in this case, if sales is referencing product or it's referencing date and one of those changes, that area and that team would be notified that that product changed. So just wanted to give some high level context in terms of where we're going. For now, let's actually go into SQL DBM and actually see it in action. Here I am inside SQL DBM in our dashboard, and I've created a fictitious organization. And as you can see, this organization has, an enterprise model. They have some OLTP models for billing and a bunch of other things. And then they have like, I called it a retail market organization. And so maybe they have here, you see they have a sales infomart, a supply chain infomart. We have that central, infomart. We even have a persistent staging area so there's a variety of different projects that are representing the data in an organization and how that data is being kind of, chopped apart, right? And to fit across that organization. So what we want to do now is kind of, how do we stitch all these pieces together back to that picture that we were showing? So here you can see I've already identified a project as being global. So I have a OLTP one. I also have this central. Identifying a project as global means that you are making it available for your other projects inside SQL DBM to reference them, right? And so to do that, so for example, in that example that I showed in the slides where we said sales needed to add dimensions from supply chain and from central. So that means that we're going to need to make sure that these are set to global. So to do that, I'm going to go to the supply chain project that we can see here, and over to the far right, we have our kind of a menu of 3 dots. If I click on that and I go to our project team, and I go to our project settings, you can see here we have, concurrent working and global modeling. For those who aren't aware, concurrent working is that where you can have multiple squads and teams. So you can see here I've assigned to this project that there's squad 3 and squad 4. You might have other individuals. For today's demo, I'm not going to get into the concurrent working, but I just wanted to let people know that you can have, concurrent people working on the project at the same time within a one common model. But here you can see the global modeling, switch. I'm going to turn that on. And essentially now is I've made this project, so the supply chain project, available for reference. And you can see that global went on. And I can do now the same thing from the sales one. Let's go to that project team. And let's turn on global modeling for that as well. And we'll go back. So now I've made of our organization these 3 different domain areas all available for doing global modeling. So I'm just going to kind of quickly go through. We can see if I go into the central team, and I'll go in. This one's very light because I've only made those a couple of tables that we had shown, but here we have, here's the date dimension, and maybe we have employee and geography, and this team owns, the common pieces. I'm gonna go back to the dashboard, and now let's go to the supply chain. So for the supply chain, you can see here again, we have that that product dimension that we talked about earlier, but it also has its own, forecast. Other thing I want to show you is, you can start dividing up your diagrams. Maybe I have my data products, I have my supplier performance, inventory optimization, demand planning, right? This is all for the supply chain area and their data products and what they want to own and design and manage. So I'm going to go back to the dashboard. And now we're going to go to the sales one. So the sales one is the one I kind of was showing in the slides where we have our fact table, our sales fact table, and we showed that they own customer and they own campaign, but they didn't own date dimension and they also didn't own the product dimension. But in order to make this data product whole, we need to have that data as well added into the design. So here you could see off to the side, much like you can add tables and other things, we have now what we call global objects. So if I go here and I say, I want to add what objects I'm going to need from another domain into our project. So we're going to do a create from new. And I'm going to say, okay, I know from the sales, I needed a table from supply chain. And from the supply chain, we wanted the product, right? So I'm going to say dim product is what I want. So you can see here, but it could, these are the other objects I could share. But for now, we're just going to take the dim product and I'm going to add that as a global object. And if I go in here, we can now see that the product dimension is available, and it actually dropped it into my screen. So we can see here that this this object came from this project, and this is all happens to be Snowflake, which came from Snowflake, and it's available. Now I need that date dimension. So I'm going to go back into the global. Let's create a new, and this time let's go to the central project, and I want that date dimension. And let's add that in as well. So now we can see that I've also have that table, and that is right here, right? So now we have the date dimension from the central team, and we have that product dimension. And so now let's actually relate that to our product. So I'm going to start with date, and we can see here that I have a sale date and I have a ship date. I actually have two, right? And so I'm going to make two relationships from my date dimension to my fact table, and I'm going to say this one is going to be the ship date, and this one is going to be the sale date. So there, now we show that there's a relationship from the date dimension to my fact table, and now for my dim product, same thing. Let's draw that relationship, and we're going to say that that relationship for the dim product, right, there's the product H key, and that the child column is going to be that product H key. So now we have our diagram and our model, right, that makes up the whole data product that we need, and we have the referencing of those tables that were owned by a different domain. So this way, from a business consumption perspective, they can understand this data is needed to make that picture. Now, obviously, we are not in control of the consumption layer. So if you're using if, for example, if you're Snowflake, you can share data across, you can query across all the different, every database platform. If you go look, have their ways of how you should do data mesh or do that type of sharing across. Here, we're just giving it from a consumption perspective and understanding is that this data needs to be put together. So you maybe put a semantic layer over the top of it. You're putting a BI tool across or a federation tool, from our perspective, how you're doing this, but this now informs your folks that understanding how the data goes across. So, well, what happens now if somebody wants to go and adds a new product description or something to the product table, right? So I'm going to save this. Again, all of this stuff with SQL DBM is version, so you can always see that now that I save, I have that version history. So what's going to go into the let's go to the supply chain project, and we're going to go to that product dimension. And so here's the product dimension, and let's just add a product description and make it a varchar. And so now we have that new column, and I'm going to hit save. Now, once I hit saved, I'm going to see I should have gotten an email. Let's see. Yeah, so here I've got an email, and I'm going to just kind of share that over with you that I made the change. I got an email notification that the supply chain infomart has been updated by me. So I, updated that mark. So I got a notification that because I was referencing that object in the other domain, I got a notification. So great. Now let's go back to the other project. So I'm going to go back to my dashboard. And let's go back to the sales project where we referenced that. If I go back to the sales project, and you can now see if I go to the product, you can see here it's telling me that it was changed. And I might want to refresh. So if I just click the recycle, you can now see that product description is now available on my diagram for folks to understand. Now, if I click on that, I can obviously see all the metadata to the far right about what's in that table. So what are the keys? What are the columns? If they have descriptions in the columns, all that other stuff about that table, but I cannot modify it. This particular project is referencing the data structures from the other team, the other domain, but we can't change it. That team owns it. So you might, have to communicate with them or whatever. But at this point, you're referencing it and you've established a contract between you and them, but you are not able to modify that. So that's essentially what global reference is here. And I want to show you one other use case that kind of demonstrates another aspect of that from a global modeling perspective. So I'm going to go back into the dashboard. Oops, let me save this first so I don't lose it. So I'm going to go back to the dashboard. And again, this is a large organization and they have all kinds of things. And for example, I'm going to show we have an OLTP system, right? I got many OLTP systems and that data is, kind of replicating or somehow it's making its way down to the warehouse. And in here we have this persistent staging area where we're going to kind of capture that data. Well, so if I go, for example, into the PSA, and in the PSA, I have created, I'm going to go to my diagrams, and you can see I have a bunch of sources. I have my e-commerce source system. I have my point of sale, system. I have my supply chain management system, my billing system, my CRM system. All of these sources are coming down into, say, my persistent staging area. But say you wanted a scenario where you wanted to show on your diagram that this is the source table and this is the target table where it's going to. So I've kind of, just for the sake of demonstration, I just kind of made a new diagram that just had one, like the sales transaction from the point of sale system. And just say I wanted to document or show that. So here, I'm going to do is I'm going to go back. I'm in here and I'm going to do a global, go back to my global objects. And in this case, I'm going to create a reference to the SQL Server point of sale system. So again, I am in a Snowflake project. I'm going to connect to my project for my SQL Server, and I forgot which table I was looking for. Let me just close this. We want the sales transaction table. So I'm going to go back, global modeling, global projects, and we're going to go to the sales transaction. So click on sales transaction. And now you can see here, right, that this is the table from SQL Server. This is the table in my Snowflake project. And you can actually see what I did here is I have my source columns. I created an ID column in the Snowflake to capture that representation because I'm going to get, maybe I'm doing change data capture, but I also have metadata that I want, which I defined in my, I created a column template for an example for my PSA metadata, right? So here you can see what it looked like in in SQL Server, and now here's what it looks like in the Snowflake PSA. And if I wanted to, I could show that, hey, this is flowing from here to here, right? And the relationship maybe is that the key is, I'm going to say, the transaction ID, right, to the transaction ID, and from there, and I'll just do let's change the cardinality to a 1-to-1, right? So here again, another use case and scenario and how you can use this. Maybe I want to drop in a comment, and I can't type. Again, being very, very generic, but again, just another concept or an idea what global modeling can do to you is that we don't care in this scenario where we're crossing data platforms, but ultimately what we're trying to show from this perspective is that data is playing a role within your organization, and understanding the role that data is playing is like the benefit in terms of what global modeling is bringing to the table. So with that pretty much concludes what I wanted to demonstrate from a global modeling and global reference perspective, right? This is everything I showed is what we're calling global reference. I'm going to go back to the dashboard, and I'm going to kind of pause. I'm going to take a look at the questions that we might have and see if I can answer any of these. Okay, so let's see. Along with notifications, when an object is modified, is there a change log available on objects that are referenced globally? So this is kind of where old capabilities and new capabilities meet. Everything that is changed on an object inside SQL DBM, we have that our change log. So even if I was to go back into the supply chain where we made that change, and I look specifically at the history for supply chain, you will see that in here that I made that change to the product description, right? So we have the history of the changes, but that is tracked by the project that owns that model, right? So again, everything that is done inside SQL DBM, we have all of that revision history. So you can see all the things I did to get ready for today, all that history is here. So, so that's from a change log perspective. This is our, the way you can get that and see that that history. What's one? How do you control when a shared dimension changes or they do a full refresh of the data, which so one thing I want to just reiterate, this is just looking at data structure, not the actual physical data itself. So if people are loading or unloading, this is just looking at it from a data design perspective, the objects that are being created across the different domains and how those relate. So in this case, this is the table that is probably physicalized inside Snowflake. However, if the data engineering team is loading and unloading or not populating correctly, SQL DBM is not aware of that, right? We just say this was the design of the structure. This was the primary key, the foreign key, the alternate keys, the partitions, the indexes, the documentation. But as far as physical data, that would be whatever tools that you're using for actually moving your data around. For change data capture, we bring data in the same normalized data model. At what point of time do we denormalize the data and model it? So that to me is going to be every organization's in terms of the architectural strategy and the data strategy that they're going to adopt is going to kind of drive. So for example, if you were doing data vault, you would do your change data capture to a landing area. Then you would probably you would go to your raw vault, so that's the next layer, and then your info mart, right? And so each step is doing a different level of cleansing. Some people are adopting medallion, so you would have landed your data from your change data capture and your bronze. You've done a little bit to that to your silver and then to your gold. If you're doing dimensional, you might be going from so ultimately what I would say is that is a data strategy in terms of whoever is the head of your lead architect or your organization is what is your data strategy. And then from a SQL DBM perspective, you can then have that strategy of, well, what's that model going to look like? So for example, here in my point of sale system, that's my, the SQL Server system. And then I had my persistent staging area, and that is the replicated model. But then I would go from that, in this case, the PSA to, like, say, the sales mart. So we had one place in this architecture I'm doing here, at one place where all that data was going, but then the different domains take what they need, for their domain from these different sources. So it really is, the answer to the question is it depends. It really is what strategy you are adopting in your organization, and coming up with that, from our case, if you're doing a data modeling, what's your data model strategy to go on top of that? This essentially functionality that allows a way to relate tables in one project to another can be Oracle or Snowflake to Snowflake. Yes, that is correct. So we don't care about the data platform when you're referencing. The reason being is, so for example, when I was in the, let's just go back to the PSA one, which I had two different things, right? Is when I'm in here, and if I wanted to, and I have, you can see here that I have this table that's in Snowflake that I own in this project, but I'm referencing this one coming from SQL Server. If I wanted to go and forward engineer that and generate DDL, the only table, right, I can generate DDL for is the ones I own. So even though we reference that SQL Server one, you can see that it's not going to generate DDL for it, right? So we're able to reference it because in reality, the team that owns the point of sale systems, they have their own, they're the ones managing that DDL. We're just trying to show that there's a relationship between this data. It could be very informative for somebody to say, where'd that data come from? Or if this was both two different marts and two different, dimensions and fact tables, you could be using a BI tool that spans across, you get that semantic layer that you might have that spans across those two different domains. This is helpful for people to understand where that data is coming from and have that visibility. Can everyone with a consumer license view comment on global projects without specifically adding them to the project, adding them to project team? So if you are a consumer, you can view, well, you would have to be given view, be added to that project, right? So, who can view the project? So essentially, if you've been given the consumer license and you're given the ability to view what you have here, then yes, you can view, you can add comments. A lot of these features are similar to what before. So if I wanted to add a comment, I can add a comment to this referenced object, right? And I can say, this is, say, is this the source, right? Again, I can post comments so the consumer, so the capabilities that were there, I can comment in here. But again, I'm commenting here in this particular project, not the other. But yes, as a consumer, everything that we're seeing here, you can see, you can't modify. So a consumer can't come in here and add a global object or a reference object. They can just see what was brought into the project. Connected to BigQuery, can I extract object schema from database 2? Comment on support for BigQuery data types. Can I create DDL based on the model created? Does it support nested or repeated column structure, which are part of it? So for the most part, we can reverse engineer what's inside BigQuery. You could make a project inside SQL DBM for that. The data types that are available in BigQuery are available. Does it support nested, repeated? I'm going to kind of, Ratinder, if you're there, can you answer that one?
Yeah, so SQL DBM does support the nested columns and the repeated columns. So if you're bringing in, let's say, for example, struct, right, you will be able to see that as part of the UI, which ones are the nested columns.
Great. Thanks, Ratinder. The next one, somebody's asked, I answered it, but I'll repeat it again. So what happens when you forward engineer when you have global objects? So when you forward engineer a project, the only thing you're going to forward engineer are objects that are owned by that project. So in this case, like I showed, This is a Snowflake PSA. The object to the right is owned and maintained, is not referenced. So when I do, like I said, the forward engineering, oh, let me save my revision. When I do generate that forward engineering, oh, I just did the whole thing, but you would only get the objects that are in that that are owned by this project and not the others. The other team or teams or domain that owns the other project is the one that can control and do the forward engineering. So in this case, the SQL, whoever's managing the SQL Server one would have to do the forward engineering. What about referencing database agnostic logical model? So yeah, so we will be introducing logical only projects into I think the week of the the week of the 4th, like early May, we'll be introducing logical projects. And you will be able to reference logical objects as well. So again, if you wanted to show the logical object on here, if you wanted to show the physical, you wanted to show how it went from logical to physical, it can really be very, some artistic freedom there. But yeah, you should be able to show the logical objects as well. How different it is from current day common data model practices for shared objects, which is being handled currently across data platform. Also, what SQL DBM brings into table in places where this is being practiced in slightly different manner, and why choose. So the biggest thing what we're showing here is, and I'll kind of said this at the beginning, is we're not prescribing what people can or cannot do in their data strategy and their data modeling practice. What we have identified, though, is that organizations who are doing data modeling, so for example, I've used data modeling tools for many years. When you created a model, if I start going into different domains or different areas and they each start creating their models, their physical models, how did you know what each other was modeling? How did you know, if they have that bounded context and they own that specific data, but you need to reference that data. What SQL DBM is bringing to the table here is the ability to not try to stuff everything into one model. What we started to see was that people were trying to model everything. So if I'll use Snowflake as an example, Snowflake, you might be using, one account with multiple databases and you're sharing across databases. You might have multiple accounts that are in different geographical regions and you're leveraging data share. You're doing data share across. So what we're recognizing is whether it's Snowflake, it's Databricks, or Google BigQuery, and all of these things, they're all giving organizations the ability to no longer is a database or a data warehouse a singular data platform. It's this large ecosystem of multiple databases and multiple things. But okay, how do you graphically or from a modeling perspective show that, hey, this table is, was being built by this team who happens to be in that Snowflake account that happens to be in Europe, and then this data is in this Snowflake account in this region in US. And here in this, this case, two different, this is SQL Server and this, but in here, I could show that this table, which is by this team that modeled it in that region, and this table, which is on this team and all that region, is you can now on one singular ER diagram show that, document that, and not have to sit here and say, how do we do this all in? Before, we had diagrams with thousands and thousands of objects, and then people saying, well, I don't want this person touching that table because they don't own it, and everything in one project was open. So this kind of gives that the autonomy that is needed, that is kind of part of the data mesh principles, but at the same time the interoperability. So again, I'll use Snowflake as an example. We don't care if it's multiple accounts. We don't care if it's multiple regions. Where you're physically instantiating this, we don't care. However, from a high level perspective, there's a relationship between the data, whether it's across regions or even cross data platforms. There are organizations that are doing certain aspects in Snowflake and doing data science and doing other data product stuff in Databricks. Okay, how do we show that these three tables went to this Databricks table? So ultimately, that is where this is You can do you can do dimensional modeling across these. You can do data vault. So if I was those familiar with data vault, I might have a hub that's in one domain, and we might have, a hub in another domain, and that domain needs a link table that joins to the hub in another domain. Have at it. Here I could reference at it. So it really is to empower organizations to do traditional, common data modeling practices, but now take it back to a more global representation of what organizations are doing today. I've seen in the preview lineage mapping models, which I'm not familiar with. Are those available in some similar sharing multiple projects too? So from a lineage perspective, at the beginning, I said that this is global reference. One of the other pillars coming up this year is going to be global lineage. So that's not out yet. It will be, one of the other pillars coming out soon. The biggest there will be if I'm showing this diagram I am right now, where I'm showing SQL Server and I'm showing Snowflake, I would be able to say, show transaction date to transaction date, total amount to total amount. I would be able to go into that and say what kind of transformation logic is being done. Again, this is not generating ETL or ELT. It might be creating a spec. It might be creating a design document. What we're trying to do here is be proactive in terms of what can we do during the design and modeling phase that can then help the data engine. It's just not saying, here's a table. By the way, this is where it came. It's not doing that in an Excel spreadsheet or a Word document. It's like, hey, I'm designing the target table. Let me help you understand what the aspect of the design is. Is that not part of the DG tools, which takes care of all of the metadata and lineage and rules that are being stored? Well, our data governance, I don't know if you're talking about our data governance features or an existing data governance features, but say you're talking about a Calibra or an Elation or an Atlan or things like that in their lineage. Here's the thing is with most of those, that is reactionary, right? So I might be having if I'm the architect and I'm going to put, when I was architect, I said, hey, I want these two tables. We're going to combine them and to create this one table. Now I have to work with an engineer. You have to spec that. Hey, I want to do this. I want to trim this. I want to multiply this. I want to make uppercase. I'm going to concatenate this. I'm going to aggregate this, right? When you look at some of the data governance tools, they do that lineage after you've built it, right? What we're saying here is everything about like SQL DBM modeling is architecting, designing the objective. So when we talk about lineage, is like, this is what I want you to do. Now somebody might take that and go build a DBT, model. They might take, and for those of you who, don't know, when we go into our forward engineering from a DBT perspective, right, one of the options is to generate your DBT YAML, right? So if I'm architecting it and I'm modeling it, how can I then hand that off to the next person without putting it into a Word document? So yes, the data governance tools do capture that, but like I said, most of those you're harvesting it from those tools after the fact. I think I've got all of the questions out of there. I don't know if anybody has any other questions. What I will say is, I think, let me share. Now I just got to find where I put it. There is an ebook, if you haven't already, a little bit about, understanding global modeling. I'll put the link here to our landing page for the ebook. Also, if you would be interested in more of a demo, like a one-on-one demo with you or your team, or if other information about this as a follow-up, if you just want to comment in the thing yes here below, then we can contact you afterwards and talk about your use case specifically. Maybe again, do a more detailed demo, talk whatever else you would want, how this is going to fit with everything else in SQL DBM. But yeah, so thanks everybody for joining me. I was looking forward to being able to share this all with you. But if there's no other questions or any other things in the chat, we'll just we'll end it here. And thanks everybody. I appreciate it. I'll give a few seconds if people want to put anything in the chat, and then I'll end this.